each of the panelists have 7 minutes just to make their opening remarks.
Right.
So if we could start with Daniel, that would be great.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. And thank you, Lord Flight. If we could move on to the first slide, please. So I've been asked, and the panel have been asked, to look at what will the future of financial advice look like and how it's going to depart from the current model. And also to what extent does digital transformation explain existing trends? And obviously something about COVID and how that's impacting this digital rollout. Next slide, please. So in terms of the future of financial advice, as we know, there are a large number of segments. We've been talking a lot about the investment industry, but obviously there's a large number of areas that those investment products are distributed through, and there are also things like retirement products and mortgage products and so forth. In terms of what can be digitalized, obviously a lot can be digitalized, but you can't really digitalize the customer experience. So at some stage, when you talk about things like retirements and mortgages, they're very bespoke, and you'll have a hybrid solution to that. Meanwhile, however, there are some parts of the industry of financial services that are more advanced than others. And so in that respect, we'll come on to that, but I would say that actually the investment management industry is a little bit behind the curve in adoption of some of the techniques I'll talk about. Next slide. So what I'm talking about here is what we've euphemistically called Fintech, financial technology and financial advice. And in that respect, this has been moving very fast, and the UK is a leader in this, and we shouldn't forget that. And it's been a leader in this because we've got an accommodating regulator. So up to now, banks and other financial institutions have been traditionally hesitant because technology has its vulnerabilities, as we all know. And that hesitance to effectively migrate services to the internet obviously comes at a cost. However, the consumers want that to happen. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. And in that respect, we have to work out how to address that. And one way to address it is through the use of application-face interfaces. And I'll talk about application program interfaces. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second. Next slide. So in my view, effectively, it's a case of adapt or die. This technology is not going to go away. It really impacts the fundamental nature of mediation in banking and in financial services. Effectively, financial services are middlemen. They're putting buyers and sellers together. And the way that that happens is fundamentally changing the future of banking. The other thing that migrating to the internet does is it explodes the amount of data, and I'll come back onto that. But also, it means that one has to trust effectively inanimate objects, and that is something that is a challenge, especially for the investment management industry. Likewise, it heightens competition and it changes, obviously, the interaction with the customer. Next slide, please. The CMA looked at retail banking, and the conclusion, which obviously everyone in the forum knows, is that actually customers are largely dissatisfied with retail banking and the distribution of products. And that is why we introduced the concept of open banking into the UK with the Payment Services Directive 2. We effectively said that actually we want to make it easier for people to change accounts, to change products and so forth, and essentially we championed the revolution in open access to finance. Next slide. So the Payment Services Directive 2, we adopted first in the UK. So regardless of your opinions of European regulation, this was championed by us and enacted by us here in the UK. And in that respect, what it did is effectively, let's forget about all the many pages of legalese, it changed the ownership of financial data from financial institutions like banks to the people who generate that data, the customers. And that has a large number of implications, and it really fundamentally changes financial services from this point on in the future here, and as we roll it out over the rest of the world in other countries. And that's at the core of what we call this fintech revolution. Next slide. So why is it revolutionary? Well, it's revolutionary because the customers get to choose. All their finances are in one place. It allows quick, easy, and direct payments. So all of this, and for investment, obviously it allows investment management of more than one different fund, different manager, and so forth. So it allows pooling. All of that is actually quite different from what we've had in the past. And many of the issues that have been raised earlier in this forum today are to some extent partly addressed by this openness that open banking is bringing with it. Next slide. We've got, just very quickly, two new types of financial service providers. So we've got a new playing field on which we're playing. We've got account service information providers and payment initiation service providers. I won't go into detail on those, so next slide. But what they do is they create a secure and efficient service, and they make effectively financial solutions be more tailored to individuals. And remember, we are first at this in the UK. Next slide. So how does this change the current model from existing models? Everyone we've been talking about today are incumbents, the investment managers that have been around for a long time. We've all heard about these new online challenges, the digital banks and so forth, or the digital fund managers, or as you're going to hear from the next speakers, robo-advisory. But there's also things like distributed services and disintermediated services, in other words, totally cutting out the middleman. Next slide, please. Likewise, at the back of all this, there's a lot going on, and I'm not going to go into that, but effectively the growing importance of non-banks. And if we're going to be talking about regulatory reform, we really have to understand what's going on under the engine of financial services. Next slide. Very quickly on the two technologies, for example, blockchain, artificial intelligence, a lot of buzz about that, but I'll just mention one solution that they can address. Shareholder voting was mentioned earlier. With the blockchain, you can effectively take shareholder voting down from a fund level right the way to an individual level. So each individual unit holder in a fund will be able to vote their individual shares in aggregate that are held in the fund. So there's immense opportunities to really address some of the stakeholder issues we've already talked about. Next slide. We were also asked to just touch on COVID. Well, I don't need to tell you, COVID is an accelerator of digital technology. We're here having this conference digitally and so forth. But here you can just see a slide of credit card spending, and we all know we probably haven't even got cash in our pocket right now. And we are moving to a digital world a lot faster. Next slide. So in conclusion, we are in the middle of a revolution here in technology. We are at the lead of it in the UK. Open banking is championing it, and the legal structure has been put in place for us to be the first to do that. Social media and so forth, this is changing business models, and as I showed, two totally new different types of company have been created. Here in the UK, we will champion these, we'll be first with these, and we'll roll them out to the rest of the world. So a lot of negative things have been said about financial services today, but I'm actually extremely positive. I think that we are really at the forefront of something quite exciting here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I just first of all ask, looking at the list of points made here, where do you see regulation coming or applying within the things that you do?
We're not talking about points of view.
I can't hear you.
We're not talking about changing protection of client money. We're not talking about changing the way that price discovery is made in financial markets. We're changing the way that data is used. So if there's going to be a review of legislation, I think it needs to sort of incorporate legislation from data protection. We already have the Global Data Protection Act, but to bring it to customize it and have a revision so that it adapts to financial data and the usage of financial data.
Some other questions?
I think, can we move on to the next speaker and then take questions for the whole panel together? So if we could move on to Paula, if that's okay.
Okay, well, I think it makes rather